everyone, I am Emily from Two Roaming Souls, and today I want to bring you the ultimate trip planning guide for visiting Vietnam. It can be super overwhelming to plan a trip overseas, so I wanted to create a visual step-by-step guide so you can plan your own trip to Vietnam very easily. Jake and I visited Vietnam for a month back in January 2023 and traveled all around the country, and I feel like we got a great grasp for what it's like traveling around Vietnam. So we wanted to share all of our helpful tips like how to get there, how to get around, how to get a visa, how to get a Vietnamese driver's license, the different accommodation styles, and some apps that you should definitely download before traveling to Vietnam. So let's get into it. So first up is, how do you even get to Vietnam? There are two major airports that you'll likely be flying into: Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh, aka Saigon, in the south part of the country. There are some smaller airports that you can keep your eye on, but you'll likely be flying into Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh. If you plan on visiting both areas of the country, then probably just find whichever flight is cheapest and explore either the south or north first. Okay, next, let's talk about visas. Visas can kind of be confusing depending on what country you come from. I will link to a document from the Vietnamese government that lists all the countries that don't require a visa to get into their country. But coming from a US citizen like me, I do require a visa to get into the country of Vietnam. It costs about 25 USD and my visa can last up to 90 days. Of course, you can stay longer, but that will require a different visa. For example, if you're like teaching English or you have some sort of job that allows you to stay in the country for longer. But if that is your case, then whoever you're working for will probably give you all the details to extend your visa for much longer. Applying for a visa is actually pretty easy for getting into Vietnam. Most can just be done online as an e-visa. I will link the website that you can apply for your e-visa. At minimum, you should at least apply 3 business days in advance. That's the minimum time it takes, but you certainly should try to apply as soon as you know you're going to enter that country so that you have your e-visa upon arrival. And then some other little tips: make sure your passport does not expire within 6 months by the time you are entering or leaving the country, otherwise you might have some trouble getting back into your home country. Also, it's important to make some photocopies of your passport, and if you do require a visa, to make some photocopies of your visa as well, just in case something gets lost or stolen. You have copies, and keep them somewhere separate than where you keep your passport. So for example, I'll carry my passport with me as I'm traveling, and then I'll leave my copies maybe in my suitcase in the hotel room. Okay, now that we've made it to the country legally and safely, I want to talk about something very important, which is travel insurance. Travel insurance is not required, but I highly recommend getting travel insurance for traveling anywhere outside of your home country. For example, someone in the US, my insurance will not cover anything outside of the US, so if any accidents happen or I need to go to the doctor, I will not be covered and have to pay everything out of pocket. So having travel insurance can help cover some of those costs. Speaking of Vietnam, the roads are absolutely chaotic. Even if you don't plan on renting a motorbike, or maybe you do, having travel insurance will cover any costs of if you hit someone or they hit you, or maybe you fall off of your motorbike. You want to have travel insurance. And not to mention, their equivalent to like Uber is called Grab, and a lot of times you'll just be hopping on the back of someone's motorbike. And oftentimes they don't have helmets or anything to help protect you. I think getting travel insurance is an absolute must. And not to mention, like if you go on any hiking adventures or do any tours or anything, you will then be covered in case any accidents happen. Some reputable companies are Safety Wing, World Nomads, or Allianz Travel. I'll link to some of those below so you can look up the individual packages for those. Okay, so now let's talk about money. The currency in Vietnam is called the Vietnamese dong. And get ready to become a millionaire, because $1 US is equivalent to 25,402 Vietnamese dong. So it adds up pretty quick. We found it super helpful to have the increments written down in our phones on a note. For example, we'd have the current exchange rate, and then we'd also put in like increments of like 5, 10, 40, 50, 60, and just to make sure you're like not getting overcharged for certain things. And then before traveling, you'll likely want to find a credit card or debit card where you won't have any transaction fees, especially if you're going to be using your credit card often. You don't want to have to pay a fee every single time. Many of the restaurants and shops will accept credit cards, but one huge tip that we learned is to always choose the local currency. Your bank will then do the exchange rate for you and give you a more favorable exchange rate. And since we're on the topic of money, tipping is not really required in Vietnam. There were a few times on like tours where they kind of hinted at tipping. For example, on like our Ha Long Bay cruise, we had a tour guide with us the whole time. And then they also cooked us like all of our meals and stuff. So at one of our last dinners, they kind of hinted towards tipping is accepted. So it wasn't required. You really didn't have to tip them, but we had a great time with our tour guide. We thought he did awesome, so we just ended up tipping him a little bit. And I think he really appreciated it. All right, next let's talk about where to book accommodation. And one of the reasons why people love traveling to Vietnam is because it's extremely cheap to stay places. Of course, the bottom tier is you can stay at hostels. Sometimes you can get a bed for as low as like $5 per night, which is insane. This type of travel is good for solo travelers or if you just want to meet other travelers. But of course, you're sometimes packed in a room with like maybe 10 other travelers, so it can be a little loud and sometimes it can be hard to get some sleep in hostels. If you're traveling with a partner, getting a hotel room is also very inexpensive. The sites we used to find affordable hotels were Booking.com and Agoda. And then of course there's also Airbnb and VRBO over there, so if you prefer more of like a house style or if you want to have your own kitchen, then you can find houses and apartments on Airbnb and VRBO. But one huge tip I want to say is you should definitely read recent reviews. The photos can sometimes be very misleading, as in they look extremely professional and the place looks spotless, but we'd get there and there'd be some, paint peeling off or, just a little less nice than what the pictures were showing. So my huge tip is to filter to recent reviews and then read those recent reviews and see like what people are kind of saying about the place. But yeah, there's tons of accommodation styles in Vietnam and many of them are very affordable. Okay, now let's talk about how to get around Vietnam. We were extremely impressed with the transportation around Vietnam. There are many ways such as like buses, trains, shuttle vans, motorbikes, taxis, and rideshare. So their equivalent to like Uber and Lyft over there is Grab, and we definitely suggest downloading this app before heading over there and setting up your credit card and everything, because you will likely use these, and you also can get like food delivery, or you can like catch a ride on the back of a motorbike for like 50 cents. So yeah, you'll definitely want to have these downloaded on your phone to use while you're abroad in Vietnam. But for traveling farther, you'll probably look more into like buses, shuttles, trains, and sometimes airplanes. We use the website One2Go Asia to book most of our longer transportation, and we found it very easy to use. You basically just put in your pickup location, where you're trying to go, the date, and then it'll give you like a ton of great options for how to get there. Personally, our favorite way that we got around was overnight trains, especially because you weren't like wasting a whole day to get somewhere. So you can catch some sleep as you're riding the overnight train to like your next destination. And then for travel over like 4 hours, I'd say sometimes you might just want to get an airplane to that destination. Domestic flights in Vietnam are ridiculously cheap. I'd say most of them are around like $30 per person, but sometimes you might be able to find one for like $5-10. So keep your eye on that. That might just be the easiest way to get to and from a place. And then lastly, you can rent a motorbike, and that is how a lot of people transport around Vietnam. Personally, I don't really suggest renting a motorbike in the cities. Literally picture like two schools of fish coming together at an intersection, and then people are just kind of like weaving in and out to get to their next destination. We found that extremely intimidating, and we were so happy we never rode a motorbike in a city. So I'd only suggest renting a motorbike if you have experience driving a motorbike or motorcycle around in like very busy areas. And so technically, if you are gonna rent a motorbike, you are supposed to have a Vietnamese driver's license. But it is a bit of a gray area, as in no one's gonna stop you from renting a motorbike in Vietnam, and you'll likely not get pulled over by the police just to like check your Vietnamese driver's license, but not to say that can't happen. But if you are to get into an accident, your travel insurance might not be covered because you don't have a Vietnamese driver's license. So I do highly suggest looking into getting a Vietnamese driver's license before traveling to Vietnam. I will link all the information below if you are interested in getting a Vietnamese driver's license. I do want to note that an international driver's license does not qualify. So if you plan to rent a motorbike, you should probably just look into getting a Vietnamese driver's license. Okay, now let's talk about the best time to visit Vietnam. As you probably noticed, Vietnam is a very large country, and it experiences diverse climates due to the huge span from north to south. So there isn't exactly a one-size-fits-all for the best time to visit Vietnam. The weather is roughly divided into wet season in the summer months and dry season in the winter months. And the wet season is typically very hot and humid. So typically most visitors prefer the dry season because it's less rainfall and cooler temperatures. But sadly, air pollution is an ever-present reality of life in Vietnam, and you'll find that the air pollution is especially bad during the dry season. Personally, we found the air pollution to be really bad when we were visiting in January, as in it kind of actually really affected us, like health-wise. We would wear masks, but we'd feel it in our lungs, and sometimes we'd get like a headache if we were outside for a very long time. And it also can affect like visibility and like scenery. So just take that into account, but there's nothing you can really do about it. It's just kind of the air pollution in the area. We found the air pollution to be much worse in like congested city areas, and then a little bit better in like rural areas. But there's also burn season from like January to March, and that's also in some of the rural areas. It's where farmers burn their crops in order to start fresh for the upcoming season. Smoke and air pollution kind of play a big effect on your trip to Vietnam. So if that is something you want to avoid, then you might want to visit in wet season instead. Do you need to know how to speak Vietnamese? And the short answer is no. But I will say not everyone speaks English over in Vietnam. So we highly suggest learning some phrases before going over there. However, Vietnamese is a tonal language, so it's kind of challenging for Westerners to learn the language. I'll definitely link to a video below of a Vietnamese speaking person teaching you how to say some of these phrases, because I am definitely not the person to teach you. This is another thing where you should have some phrases listed in a note on your phone. I suggest putting the actual spelling of the word, the translation, and then sometimes it's helpful to have the pronunciation, because sometimes it doesn't exactly look like it, or there's like an X in the word and we're like, I don't know how to pronounce that. So that can be really helpful. You might want to know like some numbers. For example, we kept saying "hai beer," which is 2 beers. And then one thing we kind of did notice is service is slightly different in Vietnam. So if you're at a restaurant, you might actually need to get someone's attention. So it was important to know "moi," which is like the polite way of saying like "excuse me" or "chi oi," but it also kind of depends on the age of the person. Just go click on the video after ours of some simple phrases to know. Write them down in your note on your phone. Again, you should just download Google Translate for offline use. It will be so helpful when you are trying to like communicate some like longer sentences to some Vietnamese speaking people. And for example, like I have an egg allergy, so I always wanted to say that I had an egg allergy to restaurants. So I'd have the phrase written out. I would try to speak it, but sometimes they'd look at me with a question on their face. So I would just show them the phrase in the phone, and then they'd be like, oh, okay, gotcha. Honestly, whenever we did speak a little bit of Vietnamese to Vietnamese speaking people, it always put a smile on their face, and I feel like it just showed them a sign of respect from a tourist. So I highly suggest trying to at least speak some Vietnamese. I think they'll really appreciate it. Okay, now let's talk about staying connected and cell phones. A really cool feature of the country of Vietnam is they basically have internet in most like public areas like restaurants and shops, hotels, for you just to use at no additional cost. So you technically don't have to have cell service because you can probably just hop from place to place connecting to their Wi-Fi, but also you could get a SIM card to put into your phone, which can be super helpful when you are in more rural areas where you might not be near a hotel or restaurant, so you can still use your phone. So yeah, there's 2 ways you can either get a physical SIM to put into your phone or buy a phone that can have a hard SIM to plug in, or technology is great and you can actually just get an eSIM online that you can flip onto your current phone that you use. So we found that the best way because then we could still bring our phone for like photos and videos, and it was just kind of seamless. So there's a couple companies, Maya and Airlo, that sell eSIMs, and they're super easy to connect to your phone. And then another way that you often will connect with people in Vietnam is either talking on WhatsApp or also using Facebook Messenger. Make sure you have both of those apps downloaded on your phone, because that might be one of the ways you might be talking to someone, like your tour guide, to get picked up from your hotel. So definitely have both of those apps downloaded. And we highly suggest just getting an eSIM. It was seamless and it's way nicer just to be able to use your phone. Okay, next let's talk about booking tours. If you are traveling Vietnam for fun, then you are likely going to want to book a tour. And lucky for you, there are plenty of great websites where you can book tours with local guides. One is Get Your Guide, another is Viador, and also we used Airbnb Experiences. We found the communication once you booked on each of these platforms to be super helpful, as in if the tour required transportation to and from your accommodation, a lot of times they'd reach out to you and just ask for your hotel or address, and they'd help set that up. Or if you have like allergies for like a cooking class, the communication was very seamless and you could just tell them about your allergies and then they'd change their menu for you. So we had a great experience booking with all three of those platforms. Or another option is if you're staying at like a homestay or even just a hotel, you can talk to your host or the front desk at the hotel and they'll have tons of great local recommendations to give you. So booking tours was actually very easy in Vietnam and handled very well. Drinking water. If you drink the water from the taps in Vietnam, you will likely get very, very sick. People in Vietnam do not drink out of their tap, so neither should you. So sadly, you'll likely be drinking bottled water everywhere you go, which we did find quite annoying, especially because sometimes the hotel would just give you like one bottle of water per person per day, and you obviously drink way more than that, so you'd have to go to a convenience store or just have to go down and buy water. So that kind of got annoying and did add up after a while, but it's better than getting very sick. I highly suggest bringing an insulated water bottle because you'll get cold water from the convenience stores, and then you can just pour it in your insulated water bottle to have cold water. Also, restaurants do outsource their ice. You'll see like a truck going by that will drop off ice. So it's safe to have ice in your drinks, but if you're at all concerned, then maybe you might consider just getting your drink without ice, but it might be warm. Personally, we had ice in our drinks a lot of the times and we didn't get sick, but it is a way that you definitely could get sick. So just kind of judge the place and make an informed decision. Okay, medicine and vaccines. No vaccines are required to enter into the country. Of course, it's obviously a good idea to stay up to date with current vaccines like the measles, tetanus, etc. Of course, if you require any medications, I'd probably stock up before traveling to Vietnam, although there are pharmacies around that you could probably get any medicines that you might need. And then, of course, I think it's just important before you even travel over there to bring Tums, Imodium, or any vitamins that you might use on a regular basis. Just because you'll likely have some stomach issues along the way, so it's just good to be prepared before traveling over there. Okay, now let's get into the fun part of where you might want to go in Vietnam. Like we mentioned, there are two big cities, Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh, aka Saigon, in the south part of the country. These two cities can be destinations in themselves, but they'll also be jumping off points for exploring other destinations nearby. So first, let's talk about Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh is the more modern and westernized of the two cities. It makes for an easier cultural transition for Western visitors. If you're looking for more quote-unquote big city features like entertainment, nightlife, and a blending of cultures, Saigon is certainly the place. The climate here is tropical and thus pretty much has two seasons, hot and dry and hot and rainy. Ho Chi Minh is closer to Vietnam's beach destinations, the Mekong Delta, and the temperate mountain city of Dalat. A popular place nearby is the Nha Trang, which is a beautiful beach destination, Mui Ne, which has red and white coastal sand dunes, and like we mentioned, Dalat, which is like a laid-back mountain city with hiking, biking, canyoneering, and more. And then we'll jump into Hanoi, which is in the north part, sometimes called the world's biggest village. It has much more of an old world Asian feel to it. The Chinese influence is much more evident here. Everything in Hanoi just feels so much more tightly packed with narrow streets and smaller buildings, and nowhere is pronounced as the old quarter. Honestly, visiting here can be a bit of a culture shock, and the city just feels hectic. This is where we first flew in, and we were just kind of overwhelmed when we stepped out onto the sidewalk. There's just tiny streets buzzing with traffic, sidewalks overflowing with vendors, street food, parked motorbikes. But honestly, despite the chaos, most people can't help but be charmed by this unique city. This area is a subtropical climate, which experiences more variance between seasons. It's cool and dry in the winter and hot and rainy in the summer. In our opinion, Hanoi is closer to the best natural scenery in Vietnam, from the mountains in the north to the limestone cliffs and caves in the coastal areas. Which brings me to Ha Long Bay, which is east of Hanoi. This is basically a must-do cruise experience. It's famous for hundreds of limestone rock formations that create a maze of floating islands. This area for sure is best explored by boat because it goes on for miles and miles. Most people will do just like an overnight cruise, but there are some where you can do like a 5-night overnight cruise. We do have a blog post about Ha Long Bay, so I will link to that above. North of Hanoi is Sapa, which was one of my favorite places that we visited in Vietnam. It's a mountainous region and famous for rice terraces and hiking in the area. And honestly, we stayed in this one homestay that was kind of a hybrid homestay hotel. Absolutely legendary views and very cheap, so I'll link to that homestay below, but if you do visit Sapa, you should for sure check out this homestay. South of Hanoi, you'll find Ninh Binh, which is like a landlocked version of Ha Long Bay. They have limestone cliffs rising above green rice paddies and winding rivers, which is really just a breathtaking scene. Boat tours are the most popular way to explore this area. We actually have a fun video of Tom Kok versus Trong Ngon, so we'll link to that video above. And then lastly in the north, there's the famous Ha Giang Loop. It's a mountainous road that winds through the northernmost region of Vietnam, often completed as a multi-day motorbike adventure. Just has stunning mountains and waterfalls and so much more. And lastly, there's central Vietnam. I would suggest only visiting that if you are staying for longer than 30 days. Otherwise, I'd stick to Hanoi and all those areas I just mentioned, and then Ho Chi Minh and the areas around that area. Some popular stops along the central part of Vietnam is Hoi An, which is a charming, well-preserved ancient town. Da Nang, which is known for its beautiful beaches and the famous Golden Bridge. And Phong Nha, which has massive caves. Okay, lastly, let's kind of talk about like how long you might want to stay in Vietnam. And personally, I think you need a minimum of 2 weeks for any trip to Vietnam. But I highly suggest staying for at least a month. There's so much to see and explore in Vietnam. And honestly, for each destination, I would say absolute minimum 2 days, if not 3 to 4 days at each destination. Don't forget to account for travel days. A lot of times travel will be like 4 or 5 hours to the next destination, so you will want to include that. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. Vietnam is such an incredible and affordable destination, and I hope this guide helps you plan your dream trip. If you found these tips helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave any questions in the comments below. Jake and I would love to help you out. Happy travels, and see you guys on the next one.